The main people who is in his administration, you can read her tweets, and there are many crazy ones, like just home ownership is racist, even though something like 40 million black people own homes.
Yes.
Okay, but also she'd vote more communists. I'm not paraphrasing.
Yes.
Vote more, and he stood by her.
Yes.
I mean, you don't have to read between the lines here.
And the Democrats, my God, please find somebody who can lead. Gavin Newsom is out here in California. Out here in California. Pulling off in his own way what I think he wants to. He's being known more for trolling Trump on his podcast or with other interviews than what he's actually doing in the state of California. They think that's leadership because they don't have it.
The Dems' grand comeback plan is unraveling fast, and it's starting to look like they're in complete shambles. Since their defeat in the last elections, the DNC has launched several comeback attempts. Yet each effort appears to fall short, and they seem unsure why. Maher, in a recent episode of his long-running TV show, exposed exactly why the DEM strategy appears to be falling apart, and we've got every detail right here. So, hit the subscribe button if you haven't, and
they were attacked first.
Well,
and they're not doing that.
Bill Maher believes one of the Democratic National Committee's biggest problems is its failure to be honest with younger voters. In his view, the party isn't just missing the mark. It may be shaping an incomplete or one-sided understanding of reality. Maher argues that many young people are being guided by incomplete or misleading narratives, especially when it comes to history and global issues. He insists that if party leaders and influential voices within the DNC took the time to provide clear, balanced, and fact-based history lessons, the outcome would be very different. Young voters, he says, might be less likely to align themselves with certain organizations or rally behind causes without full context. Instead, they would develop a more grounded perspective, one rooted in context rather than emotion. For Maher, this isn't just a messaging issue. It's a credibility crisis that continues to push the party further off course.
You would have to be with traditional and conventional Democrats. Let's have just a speck of empathy for them in this regard. You got a younger generation of progressive Democrats that pretty much are making their influence felt. And then you've got the old guard that are at the mercy of them. They want to maintain power. And you want to sit up, you got to receive votes. Look at what happened in New York City. No disrespect, but do we really think that Zohran Mamdani was the most qualified candidate to be mayor of New York City? Come on now, we know better. I'm wishing him well. I'm not being disrespectful. He's smart, he's sharp, he's quick on his feet. I'm not disrespecting him in any way. But he had never done anything. You got a governor, a former governor, who was a 3-term governor, coasting to his fort before the scandal hit. You boot him out of office. He's qualified to get your support.
Exactly. Zohran Mani had done little, Stephen Agues, to justify being elevated to the top of the ticket for the DNC in a high-stakes mayoral race. In contrast, Andrew Cuomo was widely seen as the more experienced and battle-tested option. Someone who had already proven his leadership on a large stage before his ambitions were derailed by scandal. What's striking, however, is how quickly that scandal seemed to fade from the spotlight once Cuomo stepped down from office. The political energy shifted, the outrage cooled, and the conversation moved on. Yet instead of returning to a seasoned figure, the spotlight turned to Mamdani, a far less established name in comparison to Stephen A. The contrast is glaring, raising serious questions about the party's decision-making, its priorities, and whether experience is still valued the way it once was.
For 3 terms, en route to 4 to run the state, but you don't want to run in the city. And you're going to hand the reins to a 33-year-old
he's also a communist.
Okay.
I mean, and I'm not saying that as a slur.
All right.
I'm saying that's his political view. It's a view you're allowed to have in this country, and people are allowed to vote for it.
So you have people that don't mind that, and they want that in this country. And unfortunately, if you're a Chuck Schumer or some of the old guards, you're at the mercy of all of that, still trying to stay in office, knowing that you got voters out there that will support that ahead of you.
Critics argue that many young supporters within the DNC are increasingly drawn to ideas that resemble communism, largely because of how those ideas are being framed and presented to them. They say it's not necessarily a deliberate choice rooted in deep historical understanding, but rather the result of messaging that highlights ideals while downplaying real-world outcomes. Figures like Chuck Schumer are often cited as examples of experienced leaders who, in this view, should play a more active role in guiding the conversation by clearly explaining why the United States moved away from communist systems and embraced capitalism, pointing to historical context, economic realities, and global comparisons. These leaders could provide younger voters with a more balanced perspective. Without that grounding, critics believe many young people are left navigating complex political ideas without the full picture, making them more susceptible to adopting positions that may not align with historical lessons or practical outcomes.
I mean, one of the main people who is in his administration, you can read her tweets, and there are many crazy ones, like just home ownership is racist, even though something like 40 million black people own homes.
Yes.
Okay, but also she'd vote more communists. I'm not paraphrasing.
Yes.
Vote more, and he stood by her.
Yes.
I mean, you don't have to read between the lines here.
Yes. Then turning around and asking the president for $21 billion.
Well, I mean, as the person who said Democrats are too weak and woke, I think that's your quote. I mean, this has got to be what you're talking about.
Bill Maher is absolutely spot on here. He argues that the Democratic Party often comes across as weak and overly influenced by woke pressures, hesitant to challenge the more extreme elements within its own ranks. According to this view, that reluctance creates a vacuum where more radical ideas can gain traction without meaningful pushback. There's no doubt the party emphasizes equality and social justice. But critics contend those goals become harder to achieve if they are tied to positions perceived as leaning too far toward communism. They argue that most American voters still strongly favor capitalism as the foundation of the country's economic system. If the DNC continues drifting in that direction, critics warn it risks alienating a broad base of voters. And in a political landscape where perception often shapes reality, that shift could have serious consequences at the ballot box in future elections.
I do think what you're getting at is, and I feel this when I travel, particularly in the middle of the country, like, it is hard to miss as an elected leader that people are so desperate for some kind of change. Like the young people in particular will either take it from you nicely, or they will eventually kick down the door. It's just a matter of figuring out which one is going to come first. And I think the old guard has not yet caught up to the fact that the game that they learned to play is a totally different game now. It is a totally different operation, and they haven't adapted and they haven't left. And so no matter where you go, I think Mamdani is a New York City thing. I don't think that would work in other places.
Might work here.
But, well.
It's true that many young people are demanding change, but critics argue that embracing communism isn't the answer. And that point echoes what Bill Maher and Stephen A. Smith have both been highlighting. In their view, the real issue isn't the desire for change, but the lack of grounded context guiding it. They argue that more experienced voices within the party need to step in and clearly explain America's foreign policy decisions and the fundamentals of its economic system. Without that foundation, younger audiences are left to piece together their understanding from fragmented sources. A major concern raised is the growing reliance on platforms like TikTok, where complex topics are often reduced to quick, emotionally charged clips. Critics say this creates a shallow understanding of history and economics. As a result, many young people may not have the full picture, not out of intent, but simply because they haven't been given the full picture.
I think it's a symptom of a bigger issue, which is the old guard of politics. It's done. It's over. It doesn't work anymore, and it's certainly, on my side of the aisle, not playing effective offense against Donald Trump.
And yet, there are things to be learned from Mamdani. You can take politics aside, policy aside. Very few Democrats, very few Republicans, I can't think of many, who have been able to insult, disparage, and go at Trump and still sometimes get results that are favorable for the people we represent with Trump's blessing.
For sure.
And part
because
of
he had him to the Oval Office.
Well, but whatever. He had the fake kid, the headline that he gave him, and the different things.
You.
I mean, it's not
the
that.
guy is. It's all about personal with him.
Yes,
he's not. Donald Trump is not home at night reading the briefing books. I promise you.
The panelists are right. Constant insults, disparagement, and demonization of Donald Trump don't seem to be weakening him. If anything, critics argue that the strategy may be backfiring and energizing his support. Rather than pushing voters away, the relentless attacks often reinforce his outsider image and strengthen his connection with those who feel overlooked by traditional politics. What makes this even more striking is his ability to gain ground in places where Republicans have historically struggled. Trump has managed to pull in measurable support from groups that typically lean Democratic, including Black voters, Hispanic voters, and even segments of women voters. While those gains may not represent a majority, they are enough to shift the dynamics in closely contested races. For many observers, this suggests that the current approach isn't just ineffective. It may actually be helping him expand his coalition in unexpected and politically significant ways.
However, the idea of the status quo having been successful, when you see how quickly the next generation has had a completely different life than the one before, it's hard for people to truly trust that the old guard knows what they're doing in the long run. I mean, a generation ago, they were still saying UFOs, for Christ's sakes. It's now UAP, So the idea of all these things are happening. I mean, you look at it, and young people, maybe they don't have it wrong.
No, it's still the
maybe it's the others who do.
Well, it could be both. I mean, it's the economy, stupid. I've asked this question so many weeks on this show, and I can never get an answer. I just don't understand the American economy. I really don't. I don't understand how there could be so much wealth, and I pay so much in taxes, and it doesn't seem to get to the people. Like I don't even mind doing it. Over half, always, way over half.
Now, the conversation is getting interesting. Bill Maher presses a pointed question, this time directed at Gavin Newsom, about where all the tax money is actually going. California consistently ranks among the highest tax states. Yet, critics argue the results don't seem to match the cost. Maher highlights major projects like the state's high-speed rail, which has faced years of delays, ballooning budgets, and limited visible progress. At the same time, issues like homelessness continue to dominate headlines, with encampments spreading across major cities and raising concerns about public safety and quality of life. For Maher and others raising similar concerns, the question isn't just about taxation. It's about accountability. If residents are paying a premium to live in California.
The problem that I'm having with this conversation right now is that we're accusing the politicians of not knowing. They know. $39+ trillion in debt.
Yeah.
You can't pay TSA workers $1 billion over the last month, but you could spend $800 million to $2 billion a day. And somehow, some way, you find that money to finance a war. You knew you had the damn money. You knew where it was. You knew how you wanted to allocate it, and you knew you didn't want it to go to the American people. That ain't ignorance, that's viciousness. That's cruelty. That's not thinking about the American public.
Stephen A. Smith is right, at least in the eyes of many critics. It's less about how much is taxed and more about how that money is spent. The argument is that the real issue lies in government spending priorities, with too much money going toward projects and initiatives that don't directly address the everyday concerns of Americans, instead of focusing on core issues like infrastructure, public safety, and economic stability. Critics say politicians often pour resources into programs that feel disconnected from what voters actually need. That frustration isn't limited to one party. It cuts across the aisle. However, some argue that the problem appears more pronounced within the Democratic Party, where spending levels and policy ambitions tend to be higher. Still, the broader takeaway remains the same. For many Americans, it's not about paying taxes. It's about seeing clear, tangible results from the money that's already being collected and spent.
And the Democrats, my God, please find somebody who can lead. Gavin Newsom is out here in California. Out here in California. Pulling off in his own way what I think he wants to. He's being known more for trolling Trump on his podcast or with other interviews than what he's actually doing in the state of California. They think that's leadership because they don't have it.
In the end, the debate comes full circle. Voices like Bill Maher and Stephen A. Smith aren't just criticizing personalities. They're pointing to deeper structural issues within the Democratic Party. From messaging that critics say misguides younger voters to leadership decisions that raise questions about experience and priorities, the concerns keep stacking up. Add in frustrations over government spending, High taxes with limited visible results and political strategies that may be backfiring against figures like Donald Trump, and a clear narrative emerges. For many observers, the problem isn't a lack of ideas. It's a lack of clarity, accountability, and connection with everyday Americans. If those issues aren't addressed, critics believe the DNC risks not only internal division, but also losing ground in future elections, especially among the very voters it's trying to win over. And on this note, we draw the curtains on today's video. If you enjoyed it, then hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next.